because I'm important.
Slow clap, building, as we bring our three cameras.
Hey, I'm glad everyone's clapping. Yeah.
Please, have a seat.
That wasn't.
Now we can all be seated again. It doesn't take the first basket to seat. So.
We're not going to do that again? That was great.
I've never come up to a panel with a boss. That's pretty cool.
Well,
Yeah, I think we got to work before we.
That was
Excellent. Well, just so you know, you go out, you get the same send-off as you do coming in.
All right.
So, better make it good.
So our performance in this panel doesn't matter then.
Yeah, that's me. That's what I took away from that. We
Yes.
already got a standing ovation.
Yeah, perfect.
Good
Perfect.
stuff.
So the other tradition that we have is we say nothing. We let our panelists introduce themselves because we feel like they know themselves the best. So from however you'd like to do that, there should be two. I think there's two.
Are the
mics.
are the
those on?
are the lav mics not the same as the check?
Different
Different mics.
mics.
Okay.
All right.
Well, another mic if you count that one over there.
Hey, Mike. So I'm Chase Nobles, co-founder and co-CEO of Kush.com. We are the largest wholesale raw materials trading platform for the hemp and cannabis industry.
My name is Alex Cooley. I'm part of a producer-processor, first fully permitted cultivation site in the state. Have started several companies in the cannabis space in addition to that.
I'm Jerry Tindall. I am the Chief Product Officer for Dauntless. Dauntless is a data transaction platform that helps get data from people like Alex's Grow to companies like Chase to help power his marketplace.
Wow, I gotta say, those were the shortest introductions I think we've ever had here. If that's any indication. All right. Well, welcome. Thank you very much, all three of you, for being here. This is our first foray into this industry. We typically are pretty tech-dominated software hardware, and we're excited to introduce additional companies because at the end of the day, building a company is building a company, and regardless of the industry, we all face a lot of the same problems, issues, challenges, and successes as well. So thank you for being here with us, and thank you all for joining us in something that's new to all of us. I'm a numbers person, so literally I came up through finance and accounting and have now built out back office functions for startups. So for me, it all starts with the numbers. So talking about market size, in 2018, this industry was $10.5 billion. And by 2022, it's predicted to grow to $14.3 billion, with about half of that being medical marijuana-ish, and the other half being recreational. Big market. So you guys didn't necessarily have a market fit problem to start with. So I'm a little bit curious. I'm all about origins as well. So I think I'd like to start with you, Chase, because you're bent on cannabis tourism was kind of a unique idea. So I would love to hear kind of each of your origin stories of, do you have that back of the napkin in a bar conversation framed in your office, or what was the light bulb moment for you?
Yep. So, I originally moved up to Seattle for whitewater kayaking. It was one of the greatest places in the world to be a whitewater kayaker. And I met my business partner on the side of a river while we were kayaking together, probably smoking a joint. And, he had this great idea for cannabis tours, and it was one of those ideas where it was 2013 still, and, sometimes you have an idea and you just can't stop jamming on it, right? And so that iteration just kept coming, and we kept connecting, and then eventually, we started this company together called Kush Tourism. I think I even talked with Alex way back.
Very beginning, yeah.
Yeah, so, we started doing these tours, right, as cannabis was being legalized recreationally, because back then, it was 2014, Washington and Colorado were the only two states in the country to legalize recreational cannabis, which was a very big deal. So people from around the world were coming to Seattle just to learn about cannabis and, well, to smoke it too. So.
Let's be honest.
So we launched a tour company that morphed into a media company where we would produce resources for travelers. It's morphed into this much bigger media enterprise now. And then at a certain point through that journey, I would say, we realized that the network that we had built as a media company, that early in an industry as big as it's grown was our most valuable asset. And so we decided to figure out how we could create the most value for the network that we had built, and that led us to building a raw materials trading platform known as Kush.com.
Excellent. Alex, you want to take that one?
Sure. So I'll give you the briefest version I can. Essentially, I've just kind of been riding a wave for a long time. I don't really have a cocktail napkin when this all came together. I don't really have a particular moment where it all came together. This has been my only career. It came about as a result of not becoming an elementary school teacher because Seattle Public Schools went on a hiring freeze my last year of school. And a friend helped me understand some of the opportunities that were in front of me. All of us are here just looking for opportunities and to seize them and to essentially leverage them. And so he said, hey, you've been growing this great plant, might as well do something real with it. At the time, that was in 2007, and California was really the only place with any semblance of an industry other than Amsterdam, and so I decided to go to California. That then continued into a lot of different things in several companies, and then I ultimately wanted to focus essentially on one thing and what I determined to be the most important and most enjoyable thing, which was cultivating the plant. And I did that in 2011 when I co-founded Solstice. And since we founded that, we've essentially just been pushing for the normalization, legitimization of all components associated to cannabis, and I think have been rather successful at that. We were the first commercial cultivator, in the state and in the city. We've helped write a lot of laws, and I continue to essentially just ride that same wave that actually really started when I was 12 years old and first introduced to this plant. And so I just continued to see opportunity and continue to go after it.
I would actually say that's a pretty common startup story that I've heard as well, that it's opportunity meets, a junction in time where something takes off.
I just wanted to have fun, and a lot of people are really into this. Like you mentioned, 15 billion coming our way. That's just the legitimate market that we're actually tracking real data on. The global market opportunity is 55 to 60 billion dollars. So everybody's really into this, and I've just been really fortunate to continue to have these opportunities.
Yeah, we talk a lot about, Mike and I talk a lot about how much the success of a startup is like 80% luck and timing. You have to be prepared on the market fit and product fit and whatnot, but at the end of the day, there's a lot that hangs on that.
Timing is great when it's great.
And Jerry, do you have a particular founding story?
I think my story probably follows a lot closer to what some of the people in the room here would be. I had an IT manager job back in 2016, and I got laid off in a reduction of force, but I felt okay about that because the employee who I was training to take my job is now the director of IT. So I'm like, nice, that was cool. And this was in summer 2016, and I was sort of going, man, I could keep working in tech, but I want to work on something that matters. What are some of the things out there that matter? And of course, my friends from Amazon and Microsoft were like, dude, come work for me. And I was like, not so sure about those. Not that there's anything wrong with those, they just weren't for me. And I called up a buddy who was in the medical industry at the time, probably similar to Alex, back in 2016. And I said, hey man, what's going on with tech in the cannabis industry? And he sat down with lunch for me and sort of explained some of the basics. And I said, I think there might be an opportunity here. And this might be the right time. I got lucky that I was a tech guy in Seattle, had a little bit of money saved up, and said, maybe I'll give this a go and see if there's something here. And went out and basically started down the pretty regular startup path of, customer discovery, problem discovery, like, straight up lean startup. Came to a bunch of events like this. I've been doing that ever since. And eventually in about, that was summer 2016. In February 2017, I got a team of people to actually start building this thing with me. Didn't really know what we were going to build, but knew that there was some opportunity to help some people solve some problems in this industry. And then about kind of June or July 2017, started to get some focus. So I went out and I talked to a bunch of people like Alex and said, hey, you're a grower. Like, tell me about some of your problems and the, the various challenges that exist. What do you really need? And I did the comparison between what exists in the market currently, what problems I thought people were already onto versus which ones were not being addressed, and went down the path of starting to address those, and had a team, built some stuff, started putting some mock-ups in front of people and showing some potential customer stuff, and people said, this was kind of about summer 2018, they said like, whoa, when can I buy that? And I was like, well, not yet because it's not built, but now that I know that there's an opportunity, let me figure it out. And things just kind of went from there, and I got lucky. I was one of the few startup founders that I got an exit on my original company, and I sold to Dauntless, and now I'm the chief product officer of Dauntless. So that's my story. Much more traditional startup. I think probably followed a lot of the regular processes that are recommended, and those worked well for me.
I want to.
Total. I did not. Good job. Me neither.
Yeah. My path was.
It seems so logical.
Yeah. I came from the IT world, and I was really an IT support guy, and I spent a bunch of time listening to people and listening to their problems, and instead of trying to go, I know how to solve this problem, or this is what you need, I spent time listening and said, tell me about the things that will make your business successful, and I will figure out how to help. And so that was my path.
I just, I had quit my job and started this company, and then we ran out of money very quickly because we only had $5,000. So you innovated out of analysis, where we innovated out of scarcity, which I think was probably the difference. And for me, it was, how do we figure this out now? Because if we don't, I've already leveraged myself so far. So I think
that was part of it.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out how to get those first sales. That was definitely out of necessity.
Fair.
Yeah.
So one thing that you kind of left out there is you made a conscious decision to bootstrap your company, as opposed to take investor money at a certain point.
Yeah.
I would love to kind of dive into that a little bit, because I think probably some folks in our audience would be curious as to what was the deciding factor for you.
I don't know that there was necessarily a deciding factor other than investor money is really hard to get.
They're just throwing it at you. Huh?
Yeah, it's weird. I was like, hey, I
never found one that just throws it at you.
Like, hey, I got this weed business. You want to give me some money? maybe not. When
They kind of do.
Sometimes.
But they never just throw it at you.
Right. When I was on
you
the
guys must not be dancing good enough.
I don't dance. Yeah.
for me, there was certain points in time where I felt like I could either put all of my time into raising money, because raising money is, Chase has raised a lot of money, and that's a full-time job. And when it was just kind of me as a CEO, I didn't really have a COO or any supporting. I just had a couple of developers who worked with me. And I said, okay, here's the deal. I can either go and figure out how to already build product market fit and get a product that I can actually sell that people are happy with, or I can go raise money. And every time I went to try and talk to people about raising money, they said, man, we'd really like to see you with some product market fit. And so I just said, okay, I'm done messing with you guys. I'm gonna go and just build this thing, and I'll figure out the other stuff in the future.
Excellent. So you did a lot of listening about your product. Well, I heard that Alex, you just implemented his software. Do you have any real-time feedback on
No. I don't run the softwares anymore, thank God. No disrespect to either of your platforms. We use both the platforms. I understand we're very happy.
that was super politically correct.
That's not what I work on from a day-to-day, but if they wanted me to, if we all decided I should work on it, I would. I've looked at dozens and dozens of platforms over the years, but no disrespect again. Fortunately, I don't anymore.
Yeah.
Got it. Well, I had the pleasure of actually doing a tour of Alex's Solstice facility, which was pretty amazing. If you have the opportunity, I highly recommend it. But I would say that the most eye-opening thing about that tour was that in addition to starting a business from the ground up, he basically had to become screw them wearing many hats. He had to have several occupations. So part legislature, part architect in the design of the building itself, mad scientist, innovator, kind of repurposing tools from other industries to suit your own needs, that kind of thing. So you had some additional hurdles. And we started talking about this, and I asked him, what was his biggest challenge? And he said, do you remember what he said?
No.
That was the challenge.
Challenge changes every day.
Yeah.
Honestly, hour by hour sometimes.
You said company culture. And I said, stop talking because I want this to be fresh.
Yeah, well, it's not fresh anymore.
So I would love if you would expound upon that, because I mean, when you look at what seem almost like insurmountable kind of issues that you came up against, to have that be kind of the number one thing, even if only for the day, as the issue, I think that is a hugely common occurrence as well, and I'd love to hear your viewpoint on that and what your struggles have been, and maybe even what some solutions you've come up with.
It's hard. Culture's difficult. It's and it gets more difficult as your company grows larger and larger. And over the years, I've gone from a couple people to I think we're over 100 people, and then we're back down under 100. And it's the company's ebbed and flowed with how many people are there. And culture, unfortunately, it takes a back seat no matter how important it is to everyone. Because you've got to do X or you got to do Y because you're up against the wall and you have to design a building and get it through permitting or this or that. And so that takes priority, as well as, at least for me, and other friends that have gone through this have we've kind of discussed and sorrowed in, is that you think your culture just happens, and because you believe that your company is one way, and your values and ideals and all these positive things that you want to have with the people who you share most of your life with, it doesn't actually happen that way. You actually have to work on it, and it is a project, and again, it takes a back seat. And so I don't have the solutions for culture. I try to have a really good time, and so I try and help others have a very good time. That is more difficult than it sounds, especially while maintaining, and I hate the employee-employer relationship or boss relationship or that sort of jazz, while you're still trying to build this really positive place. So we work really hard to make sure that we're good people with all of our interactions with our fellow team members, as I like to call them. But it's a hard thing, and I don't necessarily obviously know the correct answer at this time.
So what are the manifestations of it? I mean, is it retention? Is it like, why are you rating that kind of as high as you are up in the list of challenges?
I don't think, it doesn't manifest itself in a whole lot of ways. I mean, sometimes there's the Solstice Junior High, as we call it. So sometimes people will get a little immature, a little bit out of shape, and it will kind of spring up in a couple of different ways. And it seems like people should be having a better time. That's really the big thing for me. Like, yeah, everybody will get a little bit out of shape from time to time. I do it regularly. But it just doesn't, and you hear it. I don't witness it as much, but I hear it through, in meetings and things like that. And it just should just be having a better time. Yeah.
What about either of you, both of, I mean, the commonality of everybody up here is you've all built one or more companies.
Yeah, I'd say, we've doubled our staff pretty quickly, and you're right, culture, you don't realize the impact it has until you go through a moment where you realize the impact it has. And, what I what I've learned this far, and I definitely don't have this dial, but what I have learned so far is you have to be intentional about it. Because if you are intentional about your culture, then people know your intentions of the company that we all want to be. And I think that's one of the most important things that I took away. Having value statements isn't just a poster on the wall. Having values as a company is something that your employees can throw back in your face when you violate them. Absolutely. And I think having a culture statement as a business is something that is really important for everybody that works at Kush to know, because it just says, who are we? And so, like, we just had to work on this, honestly. It was a culture statement, and we are an incredibly focused, highly innovative. Golly. But it's one of those things where it's important to set this up. I'll think of it in a second. I'll scream
Is
it
it on
out.
the website? I'll look it up for you.
Yeah, it is on our website. That was the ultimate fail.
Third one. Always mention. Ours is called a culture compass. I don't remember what's on it anymore.
Yeah.
So
No, this
I'll
is
t-
important.
I'll
I'm
take
going
a
to think
look
of this. I'll
for-
remember here in a second.
And while he is,
Yep.
Jerry, step in, save.
Incredibly focused, highly motivated, innovative team, and a fun and inclusive environment. That is important. I know it's based on that talk on a stage, but that is important. I think you have to be intentional about the culture that you set in the company that you work at.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think there's a tremendous amount of truth in both of these statements. How I try and impact culture in my company and my companies is I think about culture as relating to a set of behaviors that I perform every day. So if I want people to interact in a certain way and transact with each other in a certain way, I take it as my own responsibility to be the exemplar of that every single day. And I try not to spend a lot of time telling employees what they should be doing or what they should be caring about. I try and lead by example and show them the things that are important, that they should be caring about, and that my own intention and my dedication to getting those things right and getting those things done, I think it's hard to tell people things, but it's easy to show them something, right? So that's, I think, how I really try and think about culture and getting culture in line is that it starts with me. It starts with me every single day. And if I want a company culture to be good, then I have to be good. So that's how I think about it.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's something that we all struggle with. That feels
Thanks
pretty
for
good.
reminding me. I'll get on that.
For what it's worth, I don't know that I have a culture mission statement. So Chase is better.
We're working on it.
So the one thing that we can't get away from is the legality piece of it. I noticed, Chase, on your website, even in front of who you are, what your company does, your team offering, et cetera, your first kind of tab is law.
Yeah, probably.
And I know that your name's been on just about every piece of legislation that has come out of Washington and a couple that have gone to DC as well. And I know that your world changes on a regular basis, and you've actually developed software so that you can more easily adapt every time there's a change in the status of the law.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love to kind of I'm sure you all have different takes on it as well, especially coming from different aspects of the business as well, but maybe your greatest challenge is the things that you're most proud of having influenced.
Sure. For us, the industry is so fragmented, and there are a lot of laws in regards to this space, but there's also a lot of gray area. And for us, it's a matter of trying to define that gray area, and that requires a lot of lawyers, and it requires a lot of conversation. It requires constantly looking at your operation and going, how could this be better? And how can we be ahead of this versus how can we catch up? And so for us, we're trying to get ahead of doing it beyond what we think is necessary in order to have a more dynamic platform than is out there. So for us, it's a matter of, trying to get ahead of it. And our legal bill is pretty wild just trying to do that. So.
For me, and when I was starting Soro, which was my previous company, to Dauntless, because I spent so much time talking to people like Alex, it became very clear to me that a huge barrier to success in this industry is this adherence to these legal problems that exist. And if my company was going to succeed, and what I would need to do is that I needed to build into the root of what I was doing this notion of these various compliance things that have to happen. And I needed to make sure that when I was building things, that it matched what was required from the state and the various agencies to keep Alex's business safe. Because at the end of the day, he's relying on me to make sure that his company stays in legal compliance, that when data is being moved around behind the scenes, that it meets legal compliance. And so at Dauntless, we take a very, very in-depth look at legal compliance and how to solve those problems and how to make sure that our employees stay doing the right things to make sure that the solutions that come out on the other end help keep businesses like Alex safe. And that has been a tremendous, tremendous amount of work because the regulations do change. And over time, we've figured out ways to deal with that better, but it's still a moving target. And this is a problem that is going to exist for some time. I mean, even after federal legalization, and that's not a if, that's a when, federal legalization. It's going to be a lot of work to stay on top of this from all the different jurisdictions. And so this is something that we have to stay on top of as well. I think this is probably something that's common to the industry.
Yeah. Switch. So the first big 800-pound gorilla of legal reality for me was the high likelihood of going to prison. That's what I thought about for many years before WSLCB compliance was a factor. And so I started cultivating a long time ago when we only had one law with nothing but gray area. Washington State passed its initiative to create medical cannabis in 1998, and literally the law was you're allowed to have a 60-day supply. And that's all they talked about. No other information associated to it. And so when I started cultivating cannabis, I first did so truly illegally, was very uncomfortable with that, and then that started me on a mission of creating compliance, I guess you could say. And so I went and got a medical card that I qualified for. So boom, I could put a piece of paper from a quack doctor from Phoenix on my grow room wall. I still have it. It's in one of my little keepsake things. It's right next to my desk. And I put that, and I was like, all right, I'm safer. And that started me on a path of getting safer. And that path has been, I don't know, over a decade now to yesterday or the day before, I believe it was. No, it would have been yesterday or Friday maybe. Anyway, the House of our U.S. Congress just passed protections through a rider, amendment rider. You have to learn all this nonsense of how government works. Essentially a rider provision to a budget that says the federal government cannot use resources to go after compliant businesses in both medical and adult use cannabis. This is the first time we got adult use cannabis.
Yeah!
It's huge. It really is gigantic.
It's hard to understate how much this matters to the industry.
This says the House of Representatives is for the adult use legalization of cannabis. My fear of going to prison just went a little bit lower. It's still there, because I've done a lot of stuff over the years that insanely, it qualifies.
Safe from the cannabis stuff now.
Yeah, well, I qualify for the death penalty, because I've grown so much cannabis. Under a RICO case, I qualify for the death penalty. Still in the United States of America. In this state even. Madness, I know. likelihood of me being killed for this, incredibly low. But I still am fearful of the fact that I may go to prison because I am out of compliance with my federal government. And so between those two bookends, I've really fell in love with the law. I don't like the bills from the lawyers. That is very true. It's a lot of money. But they're very smart. I have a great lawyer who's a former U.S. attorney, Mr. Wonderful John McKay. Love sitting down and have coffee with him. Don't like the cost. Honestly, he doesn't charge me for coffee.
Good coffee?
He doesn't charge me for coffee. He's one of the nicest men in the world, one of the smartest men in the world. And so I became very engaged very early and helped write one of the first major laws in Washington State, and that would have been 2010. And I've tried to be involved in every single law since. I have helped write every ordinance for the city of Seattle. I don't spend too much time in Olympia anymore. They're not fun. But I worked on this amendment to this rider budget provision, whatever we call it. And I really love it. It's made me very civically involved in other areas as well. And one truth that I found, as much as we talk about it's so unique for the cannabis industry because they're like people like me write the laws, but that's the exact same thing for every industry. It's people like us who actually write laws and pass laws and create policy, and it's really cool when you realize that, and cannabis has helped me realize that. But we all write all of these laws for each and every part of all of these industries. Now, some industries cost more money because of the joy of PACs to get you to write your law, but there are these civil servants called senators and congresspersons that we can go engage with, whether you're working on bitcoins or pot. It is really, really, really cool and really, really fun, and it's one of the hacks that I really, really enjoy. It bores the hell out of a lot of other people. You'll never catch my business partner in DC to go lobby Congress, but I line up to go do it. It's my favorite trip.
You didn't realize you were getting a political science degree.
I know.
Yeah, I got a lot of
No
degrees,
idea.
which is really cool.
It's true though. I mean, you're watching that on such a regular basis that, you know, when the 2018 Farm Bill came up in December, we knew that it had a really high chance
Huge.
closing
Yeah.
because the Democrats won the House, right? And so if the Republicans didn't pass the 2018 Farm Bill, it may be another 2 years before it gets actually passed because the Democrats are taking over the House, the Republicans are going to have the Senate. I could have told you, just looking at that, hey, there's a much higher chance here, just because we've seen this playbook before. And so it's really interesting to have to go through all that. And, you know, the stress level can be up here, but it's a matter of just being involved, so, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, to that point, when the Washington I-502 was the initiative that legalized in Washington, that was written by a woman who's local to Seattle. Her name is Allison Holcomb, and she works for the ACLU. So a lot of the initial provisions and the things in the Washington law came out of the ACLU because they were very concerned about the various types of injustices that are happening by criminalizing cannabis. So the ACLU has been very, very forthcoming in their support for the industry. But they do need people who actually work in the industry, like Alex, who is willing to show up because they can't write good laws in a vacuum. They're willing to help. They've got the expertise about how to construct the law and legislation, but they need the people who are actually involved on a day-to-day basis, who can show up and help, you know, make some good recommendations about what they should be writing.
Well, I would actually say they tried really hard to write in a vacuum, and I think our law is representation of that.
The first cut, yeah. It's
like,
better now, but the first cut was rough.
We've evolved it over since we passed it in 2012. The ACLU hodgepodge a lot of other laws that were put forward, and I mean, we talked, but not massively. And you can talk to Allison today. Go up to her husband's bar, testify on the 12th. Yes, good spot, really good soul food. Mean cocktails. You can go talk to her there. I'd love having drinks with her. And she'll tell you, we wrote I-502 to pass. We wrote it for soccer moms. And the implications of that reality we're still dealing with to this day. Washington State is the only state that does not allow outside funds. If I want to put investment money into my business, it has to come from a Washingtonian. That's a barrier. And so it's kind of sick how you realize, like, yeah, industry has to be involved in writing laws, but you don't want industry too deep into laws. So you have to have that correct balance between, the people who are pushing for the good as well as the industry. Fortunately, at the time, we weren't so much of an industry. We were incredibly in our infancy. And so you really got to bring those together to get good laws and then keep going back and working the law over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a couple of things that have come out of this, and several, and each of you have mentioned this about the fragmentation and kind of need for overall governance. I'm wondering if you are united in kind of your approach to what that looks like in the future.
I don't know, so I would say no. sounds like we're fragmented.
Plant, man.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you talk to most people who are in the heart of the industry, a lot of the same common themes occur, right? Criminal justice, medical advances, I think, are probably the two biggest drivers around there's obviously the money aspect, which is, driving a lot of the other things that are happening, but from the heart of the industry, I think it's really a lot of criminal justice and a lot of medical and advancement and improvements, especially with the opioid crisis. We see the tendrils that have come from other ways of performing medicine. And I think a lot of us probably believe there are better ways. And that, I would say, is probably something we're all united around.
Yeah, I'd say there's obviously these common threads, and one law may impact cultivators differently than it impacts retail shops, and it may impact consumers differently than it impacts cultivators, and so there's always going to be disconnect between where your own interests lie. But I think what's most important are those common threads that are within the industry, because we all believe in this plant, and we've committed a large portion of our lives to this, and so that commitment, is a forced function on the industry to have to work together because we all want this to work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think you've seen a lot of that where there have been specific bills that have passed that impact one group over another. It swings back and forth. And so those common threads are really important. But California is going through this stuff right now as we speak, and it's pretty wild to watch, and I think you have to learn a lot really fast. And Alex, you've been a big part of that here in Washington, so I think we should all be pretty thankful to this guy.
The laws aren't great yet, but I really look at how regulation rolls out is it rational and reasonable, and I kind of like sitting here thinking of like a triple P bottom line. Is it good for people? Is it good for planet? Is it good for profits? Which is the industry. And so I would be very grateful if we unify it, if we have a simple system that isn't incredibly aggressive and egregious, that is for the benefit of the people consuming it in the industry. And I think that's a lot of what's everything stems out of those. Criminal justice stems out of that. The medical advancements stem out of that, and it feels like, and we do this deal every time just to get it further down the line, is we go to these states, or the states come to us and they go, we'd really love a lot of money from you. And we go, okay, take the money. And that's all they're interested in. It's getting better. You have like how Illinois, way to go, signed today. Illinois governor today for the first time. I know. It's the wins and we care a lot, but anyhow. So the governor of Illinois today signed the first ever legalization of adult use cannabis that was written by a legislature. All the other 10 states have been via initiative. They actually did it through their legislature, which is massive.
Yeah.
And so what they did that I think was really positive that they looked around and learned from others is that a major criminal justice component built into it.
Yeah.
And I don't know how their bill looks for the industry. They've always been a big marijuana, which is I'm not a big fan of. However, 700,000 people now have a better future and opportunity because of the foolishness of how their past was treated of engaging with cannabis. I know that's cryptic. What I mean is 700,000 records were expunged. And they wrote that into their law. It took us 5 years. We just did it.
We don't, not even expungement.
No, we didn't even do, we pulled back, well, we got rid of misdemeanors. Misdemeanors are expunged. Felonies are not.
Felonies are, and those are the ones that matter, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I believe, unfortunately, felonies are still part of Illinois. So long as it's a non-violent drug crime, essentially. Sure. It all got expunged, as well as every case in the pipe for adult use got thrown out. Like, we did that here in Seattle. Pete Holmes, he does some good things. He did that. Yay, Pete. We got rid of all the cases too, but they did it by their legislature. Now that's really positive, and we're pushing forward in a lot of those ways. A lot of the conversations I'm having in DC are pretty good for the industry. Now there are of course a lot of people vying for it to only be a couple people in the industry. And I think we need to strike a balance of how this regulation rolls out that gives everyone an opportunity, has a major harm reduction component, pushes forward medical advancements, but doesn't just pull the curtain up on it. Because pulling the curtain up on it is dangerous for everyone. So they really need to be calculated and rational and reasonable.
So speaking of which, so we talked about timing earlier, and how lucky and fortunate you folks have been, and others like you, in kind of the coming up of your companies. Do you think that we're at market saturation now? I mean, if you have not already entered, this space, is it pretty crowded at this point?
It's very crowded.
I read a something along the lines of there's like 44 POS systems, but only 5 hold 80% of the market share. So I mean, have we kind of crested it and ridden that wave? And the players who are in the space are those the folks that are going to be the ones that kind of take it to the future?
I don't think we've even remotely crested the wave. I mean, if you look at it, this is just Washington, right? And across the country, medical or recreational, you have all these different silos. Each state has their own silo, their own regs, their own software solutions, their own this. So saturation, I don't think has even, really started to hit the curve. But I do think whenever that we do crest, it's going to be a quick drop, right? Jerry?
I think the question around saturation depends on what sort of a business you're trying to run. I think as a
there are always new opportunities. Yeah.
as a grower and the licensees in say Washington, I think probably Alex would agree that it feels pretty saturated in terms of the growers.
Few people came to the party.
Yeah. So that I would say is saturated, but in a new state, when it opens up, some of the early movers in those states will have some opportunity, and it's companies in this space, I think, in general, have had a hard time replicating success in multiple states. It's usually like the state that the company started in, they will do pretty well in if they were there early and they're making waves, but as soon as they try and enter a new market or a new space, it's difficult. So I don't think there's anyone at this point who is really, and this is including my own company, right? These are challenges that we all deal with. And so I don't know that there's anyone who I feel like has cracked the code for a national or a international play at this point, but there are definitely incumbents in individual kind of pockets for sure. And the incumbents that are there, I think will be hard to catch outside of them really, shit in the bed, which some will, some will. So I think there's definitely opportunity, but it has to be very deliberate. It has to be strategic, right? It's not just going to kind of be like, oh, I just need to do this business and then it'll work because there's so much opportunity. I would say that ship has sailed at this point.
Yeah, I don't think we've peaked, but I think we're rounding out. We're by no means at this aggressive, hockey shape run up. That has definitely slowed. And I think there will forever be opportunity so long as you're approaching something in a unique and novel way in the industry.
Well, So I wanted to, I think one of the things that is hard to see from the outside, unless you're in the industry, in the day-to-day, there's, and you know, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, but to me it feels like there's two different cannabis industries right now. There is the one that we're all familiar with, kind of sitting, touching the plant, being in, doing business on the day-to-day. And then there's the Wall Street version of the industry, right? The Wall Street version of the industry is there, but it's not the same game that we're playing. And I think a lot of us would, in the industry, feel like the Wall Street game is kind of vaporware at this point. Because there's not companies that have figured out how to crack the code, right? But the investors on Wall Street will for sure tell you that there is, because they want you to invest. They want you to put your money into these cannabis stocks, right? That's the business model. I think there's a lot of similarity to Bitcoin, actually. If you look at how the market has played Bitcoin, I think there's a lot of that happening in cannabis too. So, you know, it kind of depends on which game you're playing and, you know, where you're trying to sit. But I feel like there really is two very different industries. There's the people on the ground floor, and then there's the sort of market version, and I don't think those necessarily match right now.
I definitely agree with that in the sense that there really is two worlds engaging with this right now, and there's few operators who are somewhat in the middle. You know, how a lot of these regulations are rolling out, it does only give so many people opportunity to participate, especially because I'm now looking at international markets, or the stock market, or the Canadian exchange, or a friend's company just went public on the NASDAQ last week. So it's kind of morphing together, but I don't think anyone's truly cracked the code. I agree with you on that. However, they're working really hard on it. And so you do have groups like Tilray or Canopy who are getting one of 4 licenses for Germany, or who are setting up operations in Denmark, or working in Colombia, and really being still a major player in Canada. Are they operating a lot? No, not really. There's only maybe 10 groups that are operating in a real large way, whether that's multi-state or international. I think the opportunity is being gobbled up by those folks. But in a way that not many of us are prepared to do. I'm not going to go to Germany tomorrow. I don't have the resources to go to Germany. I was there on holiday a couple months ago, but I'm not bringing my business there because the capital that it would require for me to go feel out the German market is just so incredibly not worth it. They're on these massive Wall Street-backed long-term plays. So it is a different industry in that sense. Taking it back more to a micro level, I don't think there is much opportunity for a story like mine anymore, which I think is unfortunate.
Yeah, I would agree.
And so I try to go around and talk and help people kind of get the opportunity that I had. Whereas in Washington State, there was a lot of people like me and a lot of people who had the same opportunities as me, and plenty of them are still here. Some are my best friends. One's the guy who told me I should do this as a career. He just sold almost a year ago, sold his magazine to High Times and has a major grow down here. I don't think in Oklahoma when it goes adult use for medical, or when North Carolina finally goes forward, there's dudes like me growing cannabis in North Carolina. Probably not as many as Washington because we did it a lot up here, but those people, those gals and guys aren't going to have the same opportunity. No one's going to go, sure, here's whatever you need, or it only costs, like we started Solstice with like 70 grand. That's a good amount of money for a startup, but to start a cannabis business now as a producer processor, I don't think you should do it for less than 3 to 5 million. That's a different game now. And so it's just a crazy kid like me just doesn't have the opportunity. He can go work for a GTI or a Have a Heart as they go around the country, or maybe a Solstice. I'm banking on federal legalization. I'd rather just stay here. I don't want to go anywhere else. I've gone and lectured at the world's first college, Niagara College, first college for cannabis. They actually have a real federally approved grow at a 2-year technical school that creates amazing horticulturalists. Well, they're gonna come up through the pathway if they're, 18 and decide that they want to cultivate cannabis, like I was that age and decided I want to cultivate cannabis. The opportunity for more people to become growers, I think, is incredibly limited. There's just not that many licenses. We've learned the utter mistake of unlimited licenses, and we learned that right here in Washington. And so no states are coming online like that. So you're looking at a new state coming online, and on the high side, they have 100 licenses available. Well,
Unless it's Oregon.
yeah, but Oregon's come and gone. They've stopped issuing licenses, so they have finally learned that lesson. I mean, I got the LA Times sent to me 4 times over the last 2 days of like, oh, Oregon figured it out with 2 laws. They stopped giving licenses and they're allowed to export. Okay, sure, Oregon, you have so much cannabis and you have 8 people. Like, you have been an example of do not give unlimited licenses.
Right.
So the pendulum is gonna swing more and more toward the Illinois big marijuana model where they issued 4 originally for medical. Georgia just passed, they're issuing 6 licenses. So, always opportunity. We live in the country of opportunity. But the opportunity to go, you know what? I'm going to grow marijuana because it's legal now. That is incredibly diminished. Incredibly diminished.
Yeah, when I have friends who are asking about the industry, they poke around, they go like, hey man, like I got some money and like my buddy was thinking about like doing this grow. Like, you think I should put money in? There's a lot of money in this. I'm like, do not start a grow. Do not start a grow. This is an awful
where it's
idea.
all gone. Everybody's going to hemp.
That's what I was just about to say.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
what we've seen look, we have scar tissue being in Washington just because we were so early.
Well, we all do. Every state does.
Every state has scar
Look at
tissue,
California.
but in the life cycle that we're at, we've seen a lot, more farms probably went out of business this year in Washington than they had in any other year in Washington because of the price drop. But that led to a shortage in some of the raw materials market, and then the prices climbed. The price of trim has tripled in the last, 6 weeks.
Sucks trying to source it, but it's great when you got it.
But we're in a different life cycle than the California market, which feels like 2015.
Yeah, we're further ahead than anyone else.
And then that story still does exist in hemp right now, where you're seeing major brands pop up out of nowhere and selling into consumer packaged good, big box retails, where, I look at the industry as hemp and cannabis combined, and this market in Washington is at a different life cycle than the California market, than the Arizona market, than the hemp market. And so when I think about saturation, I still feel like it's still so early in this space. And although we see a lot of consolidation, there's a lot of innovation happening as well, and I think there's a lot of room that it doesn't have to be zero sum. The bigger you are, and I'll say this to anybody that's thinking about starting a company in a space with large incumbents. The larger you are, sometimes that can mean the larger the liability. Say you can't produce in your 550,000 square foot greenhouse for 6 months, then you're losing way more money than if you have a 100,000 square foot facility or a 30,000 square foot facility or a 10,000 square foot facility. So I think it's 2 different games, obviously, but I think we're in a much different life cycle of our industry in Washington compared to California, compared to Arizona, compared to hemp, compared to federal legalization. I think there's just a much longer road to go here.
Got it. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, I was gonna ask Alex a question. So my take on it is that eventually cannabis probably ends up looking like something like liquor, where you get your Budweisers, but you also get your craft beer, and there's small businesses that can carve out craft business, but then there's definitely going to be at some point Walmart weed, right? And so like consumers will make decisions based upon what they prefer and what sort of brands they support and which they care about. So I'd be interested to know kind of how you feel about that.
Have I spent a lot of time thinking about this one?
Yeah.
So we actually had this discussion because it's a question I get a lot of like, well, are we going to end up like X, or is Y who we are? And what I've ultimately landed on is cannabis is going to be cannabis. The story of alcohol prohibition is very similar yet very different. The rate that our culture is devouring information and regurgitating and turning into new things is so incredibly fast to the craft beer movement. The craft beer movement took something like 40 plus years. So it was on a really long arc before Sierra Nevada came back in the early 80s. So I don't think we're necessarily going to go the way that alcohol went. We could end up similar to alcohol of your larger operators and then your ability to still be craft operators. However, laws really aggressively need to evolve, and I don't think they're going to evolve at that rate, which then therefore does put us into that arc similar to craft beer coming back. And what I'm speaking to is any one of us could go start a craft beer company tomorrow. None of you guys can go start a cannabis operation tomorrow. It's going to take you a little more time because of the licenses associated to it. I can home brew. Only reason I'm legally allowed to home grow is I've like broken 5 vertebrae. That's how I get to grow at home, and I do it for fun, but kind of craft beer style. So it's just the entry ability is really different. Beer and alcohol are a sum of parts. Cannabis is a single entity, so I think that's going to really change how the type of industry and players that evolve out of it. I'm really interested to see it all happen, but at this time, I don't really know who exactly we're going to grow into.
Well, and this industry is so much bigger than just like the beer or wine, like in the sense of like product lines. You're talking about, you're not finding alcohol patches or like alcohol lotions or
There's powder there for a little
alcohol
bit.
makeup or, like we're putting hemp and cannabis into everything that it's, where there is comparison on maybe the THC market or the craft bud market, there's no comparison in my mind unless you considered alcohol like rubbing alcohol and cooking.
We're an amalgamation of all these different industries.
And the pharmaceutical side of it it's just, I don't know, it seems so much larger in scope of product variance.
Yeah, so to your point about being an amalgamation of industries, back when I was first thinking about this industry and learning about it back in late 2016, early 2017, what I settled on was that this industry was so difficult because the cannabis industry is actually a combination of 3 industries already built into it, and it's a combination that has never existed, right? So if we really kind of think about what cannabis is, at least right now, and I think will continue to be, it's an agricultural product that is sold like a liquor product and regulated like a pharmaceutical product, right? And you go like, what industry is like that? You go, none. So what do? I don't know. I think we'll try and figure it out.
All 19 agencies on it.
Right,
They
yeah.
are putting all 19.
In California
I'm very aware.
has, man, they have so many agencies involved that it is hard to get
Which
anything
we
done
thought
there.
was a good thing originally when California was like, bring industry in. You want to come talk to PG&E? You want to talk to the Water Reclamation District? You want to talk? Everyone was involved, and now it's
Until
like
every single one of them gives you a fine
Yeah.
that is like 10x the value of your property, and you end up having to turn your property over,
Yeah.
which is what is happening in the Emerald Triangle.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about the impact of legalization in California on small farmers up there, you put 19 agencies on small farmers, everybody's done something wrong, and it's heartbreaking to see a lot of it.
Yeah.
So
It's
that is the
it was
impact
the biggest
of
fear
industry.
they all had.
And it has come to fruition in Humboldt, right?
Yep.
So
And-
I don't know. I have mixed feelings regarding all
Yeah.
of that,
Yeah.
other than how can we help and how can we
So-
push forward.
So I hear all the challenges, so I'm going to forgo that.
Wait, we got plenty of those,
We got plenty
yeah.
of challenges.
We had opportunity.
I was just going to say, can we come back around to that?
Sure. Sure. Yeah, not trying to make it a bitch fest, yeah.
We could.
But do you have a sense of where the innovation is going to have to come from to
Yeah.
kind of change the dialogue?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think everybody's playing a very similar game right now in this space, and I think the innovation has to come from, it's on the production side
Mhm.
and manufacturing side, it has to come from efficiency and scale. So how can
Is that
I...
a technological problem? Is that a horticulture problem?
Well, I mean, it drops through a
all of
lot
it,
of categories, right? As far as, Alex can expound on what it takes to grow more efficiently and to produce, a similar quality product. Because if, small farms don't do that, larger farms can push them out. And because the price has been stair-stepping every year. It's been stair-stepping down. You've probably noticed it on the consumer market.
Kind of similar to hardware, and I mean, from
True,
that standpoint.
true. And I don't think it's a complete race to the bottom by any means, because like we have seen this supply demand cross and now prices are starting to rise. But I think if you want to be long-term sustainable, you have to operate efficiently, but you also have to build a brand. And people don't realize how important that brand is when it comes to longevity of your business. And Alex, you've been out there in front of everybody with Solstice, and you've become one of the larger brand recognition names in this state, and you've done a great job there. But I'd love to hear, when it comes to technology, how do you look at the efficiency side? Because I'm sure that's something that you deal with because you pay the electrical bill.
I don't look at the electrical bills, right? I hear about them though. Technology is huge for a business like mine evolving. A lot of times it really feels like we're just ahead of the technology, which is a growing and learning process. That is a real big opportunity overall, because I've spent a lot of my career going and looking at other industries and taking what they have and repurposing it. I've looked at dozens of horticulture-specific software platforms or supply management systems and things like that, and trying to apply them in our industry. Now we have people actually building it for the industry, which is massive. I really think some of the biggest true opportunities are federal legalization of adult use in the United States. I think it's going to roll out in a really slow fashion, kind of similar to alcohol, but slower. That's massive. This is the biggest market for cannabis. We haven't touched on it, but I think it is the legalization of other drugs. That is a major opportunity that is assumptively coming from my industry, because I've been called it plenty of times and I use it as a badge of honor now. I make drugs. That's what I do. And I sell drugs. And so why would I not engage with other drugs that have been pushed in a similar way that cannabis has? We're seeing it happen now. Denver, which it only affected 63 cases in 5 years. However, it's a step in the staircase of what Oregon's going to do in 2020. So we have psilocybin becoming legalized. And so as a result of this, the opportunity is to take all these things back. And I really think we're going to, with a lot of different substances. That's a major opportunity. And with taking back those other substances, as well as the cannabis plant, is the pharmaceutical opportunities. The really, we're nowhere near understanding what these compounds can really do. So I think I'm not working on that. I'm just listening to smart people and trying to follow them and make the products they're thinking of. But from a chemical structural perspective, we have jumped from I can't even say how far back, BC to barely the Stone Age, to now we're really working with real tools, and now we have semiconductors, and we're understanding these cannabinoids and then how it relates to the brain and genes, and I think that's the biggest one.
Yeah.
Whoever unlocks how our body engages with all these different compounds, that's really the one who's going to win the game.
I think in all coming here, I can only speak for myself. I don't think we were realizing we were getting both a political lesson, a science lesson, and an agricultural lesson.
That's the cannabis industry, right? That's the cannabis industry.
Whining session.
Wine.
Not actual wine, we're just whining about it.
Yes. We can talk about terpenes and wine, though.
Yeah. But when it comes to the science behind cannabis, we talk about CBD and THC a lot, but something that has spiked in interest on our platform has been CBG and CBN.
Oh, yeah.
And people just get excited about it because it's something new, and it's not really new, but it's new that it's been isolated, and it's new that people are running experiments with it.
Can you give me pure CBD?
Let's talk later.
Really?
It's gonna cost you some money.
I got no problem spending money for that.
Anyway, so like there's this like much deeper layer to this plant than just getting stoned. And like I love getting stoned, but
Awesome.
there's this much deeper layer to this plant where CBD is kind of household going in everything product, but then there's also CBN and CBG and THCV and the list is very long, and they're starting to isolate these individually, and they all have different properties, and it's really interesting to see specific custom formulations being made with these cannabinoids that have different entourage effects between them. And hemp has unlocked a lot of that because it is a cannabis plant just with not THC Delta 9.
Yep.
But we have THC Delta 9 in this state, and we have hemp in this state now too. So it's really interesting to watch that from a scientific pharmaceutical standpoint, because the calls we get are really interesting.
And to take that and contextualize it into a little bit more focused opportunity for things that people are looking at, I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity in being able to standardize the experiences that consumers are having at the retail storefront, right? So most of us have probably, well, maybe not most of us, but some of us here have gone into a dispensary before and picked up products, at least.
Bought Solstice, right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Or will now. Who's been into a weed store? Yeah.
This morning to get the door prizes for
Yeah.
today.
Yeah. And
Which Mike just came up with. So
I think right now most people who are regular consumers understand that there's so much variability in what you buy at the retail storefront that there's not a lot of confidence that the thing that you're buying is going to give you what you were looking for, right? So in the sort of immediate term, the way that the plant science and the chemistry and all that lines up and the grow processes and procedures, I think there's a lot of opportunity to figure out how to deliver consistent products. And businesses that can figure out how to deliver consistent products, I think will do very well. And businesses that can help facilitate that will do well. And businesses that don't pay much attention to that, I think are going to ultimately have a very hard time competing in this market.
well, the passion here is obvious, and I think that that's actually something that's shared in this community all the way around, regardless of what the industry is. So thank you for sharing that passion with us, and thank you for being here tonight. And I suspect these guys aren't going to run out of words either, so if you want to talk to them afterwards. So, on to the important things, door prizes and the big exit.
All right.
Prizes.
Oh yeah. Heck
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So we basically, along the lines, I'm actually glad that you mentioned that there are many forms of this, because that's what we tried to cover here. So we had
Nice.
some
Well
tea-
done.
I know, right? Like, I do my homework.
Alright.
All right, so each one of you actually gets to hand one out and pick
Oh.
a name.
Fireworks Northwest.
Wait, there's fireworks?
There might be afterwards. I don't know. I make no disclaimer here.
You're gonna
All
want this
right.
one. It's got
So Jerry, you get to pick a name.
Let's see here. I'm going
Yeah.
going to the bottom. I saw some of those. Sorry for the person who I looked at. Puneet Sharma. Woo!
Yes.
All right.
Did he get it? Did he get the name right?
Did I get it right? Did I get the name right?
Yes.
Yes!
Wow, give him a door prize.
Congratulations.
Excellent. And Alex, please pick a name.
Andrea Wallace?
Oh my God, I don't know anything.
Yep.
And Chase, please.
Christopher Crittenden.
All right. Enjoy. Well, thank you all for coming tonight. Like I said, I think these guys would be happy to speak to you if there's anything that we didn't cover today that you would like to be covered. And in the spirit of our Alicia, CEO of Storm Exit, I'd like all of you to rise. And we're going to clap these guys off stage.
Ah, yes.